Time to think, yeah, not think like you think, that ain't thinking.
Did you know that most dogs and cats receive well over a dozen vaccines before they reach adulthood? Most puppies receive their first vaccination between 5 and 7 weeks of age, then every 2 to 3 weeks until they are 16 weeks old. These are combination vaccines, which can contain up to 5 different attenuated viruses in one syringe, given 3 times before the puppy is 16 weeks of age. That's 15 vaccines before 4 months of age. Then puppies are given rabies vaccine, plus kennel cough, and lepto and Lyme vaccines, and, depending on risk, the influenza vaccine. That's over 18 vaccines in a span of 3 months.
So Pasteur wusste, um wieder bei Pasteur anzuknüpfen, dass Bakterien nicht krank machen können. Punkt aus. Sind genügend Versuche gemacht und publiziert worden in Deutschland, unter anderem durch Max von Pettenkofer, der aufgezeigt hat, was Cholera ist und wie Cholera ganz einfach zu vermeiden ist. So, Pasteur kam nun jetzt mit der Idee, weil er ja auch im Auftrag arbeiten musste, um ein Argument zu haben, dass man die Engländer nicht durchs Mittelmeer durchlässt, bei Gibraltar den Sack zumacht und die abknallt. Und hat behauptet, es gäbe einen neuen Erreger und der macht sein Krankheitsgift auch im lebenden Menschen. Und diese Idee nannt er Gift. Lateinisch Virus. Das war die Idee. Er hat gesagt, es ist 1000-mal kleiner. Wir nehmen so dichte Filter, wo Bakterien überhaupt nicht durchgehen, drückt hier die Flüssigkeit durch, sein Leichengift, spritzt das in das Gehirn von Hunden, die an einem Holzpfahl senkrecht angebunden worden sind, 1/3 des Volumens des Hirns vom Hund, dem bläst das auf der anderen Seite zum Ohr heraus, er krampft, er bellt, er schäumt, er stirbt, Tollwut. Nichts anderes hat Pasteur gemacht. Pasteur, der denn auch behauptete, er hätte das Gegengift gleich zu seinem Gift, zu seinem Virus, um das Impfkonzept, was ursprünglich dann in Frankreich stark vorangetrieben worden ist, weil ja die Deutschen ihre Antibiotika hatten und ihre Chemotherapie, hat in allen seinen Dingen massiv betrogen. Er war doch noch so viel Mensch, dass er seine Betrugstaten fein säuberlich parallel zu seinen Laborbüchern seinem Tagebuch anvertraut hat, aber verfügt hat, dass diese seine Aufzeichnung niemals veröffentlicht werden dürfen. Die Familie ist superreich geworden natürlich durch diese Geschichte. Der letzte männliche Nachfolger Pasteur hat sich aber nicht dran gehalten. Der hat ein bisschen mehr Gewissen noch als sein Vorfahre und hat es der amerikanischen Forschung, der Princeton University, zur Verfügung gestellt. Und da hat Professor Gerald Geisen 1993 eine Analyse publiziert in englischer Sprache, wo gezeigt worden ist, dass Pasteur massiv und bei allen seinen Dingen betrogen hat. Geimpfte Tiere, die quasi dann überlebten, wenn sie infiziert worden sind, die sind nicht vergiftet worden. Die Kontrolltiere, die dann ohne Impfung gestorben sind, hat er massiv vergiftet und so weiter und so fort. Das war Pasteur. Pasteur, der Erfinder der Idee eines kleineren Virus, das man im Lichtmikroskop nicht sehen kann, eines kleineren Erregers, Krankheitserregers, der aber immer sein Gift macht, sein Krankheitsgift, was man im Modell, auf das man ja schon Jahrhunderte aufbaute, ein Modell, das in Krieg denkt, aber nicht in Symbiose, wie die wirkliche Biologie nur funktioniert.
The inventors of vaccines have chosen a belief system whereby infants are all born with inadequate immune systems, and that the only way they can be saved from hepatitis B, rotavirus, etc., the infant vaccines, that the only way they can be saved from these diseases is getting vaccines into them as quickly as possible in multiple injections.
Kittens, on the other hand, receive 14 to 19 vaccines. The first vaccination, when a kitty is 6 or 7 weeks old, is 3 or 4 shots that are usually combined into one syringe. In a span of just 2 months, they receive another 9 or 10 vaccines. and at 16 to 19 weeks of age, they may receive another 4 to 5 shots depending on their environmental risk. You may be asking yourself, are all these vaccines even necessary? And if so, are there any risks?
And then you have a doctor standing there with a degree who's gone through all this training and education saying, your own immune system isn't enough to fight this. That's because the doctor doesn't know how to take care of an immune system, because the doctor was never taught in medical school how to take care of an immune system. So what you end up with is a whole society from start to finish that doesn't know how an immune system works, that doesn't know how to take care of it, doesn't know how to replenish the nutrients and minerals that are needed, does not know how to ingest a diet that will support it, and then when it fails, it's God's fault. We need a vaccine. You know, it just wasn't designed properly. Or, you know, these infections have gotten so much worse that our immune systems just can't fight them. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that a healthy system that's detoxified and has a tuned immune system can't handle just about anything that comes along.
Dr. Ronald Schultz, an expert on companion animal vaccines, said that there is little to no scientific studies that show the need for revaccination in a dog or cat in their lifetime. One well-timed shot for your pet can be enough to protect him for his life.
And I understand there are a lot of people, if you ask them about HIV causing AIDS as being a fact, they'll say, of course, it's indisputable. And the very fact that they will say it's indisputable might lead you to question their ability to understand scientific method. People that think any scientific fact is indisputable don't understand about scientific fact.
I had met a lot of AIDS researchers at meetings, and I had always gone up to them, if they talked like they knew about HIV and AIDS, I always went up to them afterwards and I said, where can I find a scientific reference that I can use for my, remember I said I had a sentence there, it said HIV is the probable cause of AIDS, and I needed to have that backed up by something before I could write it and submit it. And I went around and I asked a whole lot of people. I said, well, the people, you know, I can't find it. At first I looked for it, you know, just in like computer searching kind of stuff like that. But then I said, there's got to be somebody that knows this. You go to experts and ask them. And so I asked all these people one after the other, and none of them had it. None of them. And I was getting really freaked about that. That's when I first started saying, they don't know. Nobody really knows. This whole thing is a big sham. It's ridiculous.
Even though, as we know, viruses, the things that they call viruses, are just actual tiny particles of protein. They're not alive. They are not living organisms. There are certain things, even within scientific terms, there are certain things that determine whether something is alive. And that is that they have to be able to eat and excrete and reproduce and have a certain minimum DNA. Well, these things that are called viruses don't have any of those things. So they're basically not alive. They're completely inert. And yet, the medical establishment blame them for almost everything. And again, this will ring true with people, again, with the stuff that's going off in the world today.
So wait a minute here, David. I'm sorry to interrupt, but every evening on the news, they show me a picture of a coronavirus.
Yeah.
Dr. Kaufman was generous enough with his well-researched information to inform us that that was an artist's rendering of a thing that has no existence in reality. From your point of view, what the hell is that thing they're showing us every night on the evening news called the coronavirus? What is that?
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
CGI images.
The CGI images, because one of the things, which of course they never tell you, is any of these images through an electron microscope will be flat and only black and white, and certainly not moving. And yet we get these wonderful things in almost 3D, full color, and we get lots of different pictures, of course, of the same virus, which is a bit of an anomaly. But yeah, they're pure CGI. And I would challenge any of them to say, no, these are genuine pictures of a virus. They are absolutely not. And it's just a con trick, really, because people don't question it and they think they're actually seeing a virus. You know, this is it. You know, this is the thing. Not true.
So I've tried very hard to find additional experiments where they tested this theory about contagion of infectious agents. And I could not find any conclusive studies that proved contagion exists.
When I started looking for specific illnesses, like polio or measles or coronaviruses, what I found is that no one did that experiment. Like, no one proved that it caused an illness.
And no vaccines increase the health of a population because vaccines do not increase the health of a human. There's nothing in a vaccine that our bodies actually require. We don't require aluminium. We don't require mercury, polysorbate 80. We don't require formaldehyde. And those are some of the things that are commonly in vaccines. So there's no nutritive effect of a vaccine. So I don't believe that vaccines create health in a population. And I believe that there are always better ways to deal with diseases in a population than vaccinating anybody.
But why all the pressure from veterinarians to revaccinate annually? Well, let's look back on where those recommendations actually came from. In the 1970s, vaccines sold in the market were licensed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These vaccines were made based on studies that lasted only a few weeks to a few months. No one actually studied how long the vaccines would last, and vaccine makers didn't bother assessing duration of immunity because these tests were expensive and would take years to complete. So it was arbitrarily decided that annual revaccination would be the standard in veterinary medicine. This decision was not rooted in science. It was rooted in a guess, which quickly became a mainstay of generating at least one guaranteed annual vet visit for the veterinarian, hidden under the mask of the annual wellness exam. In 1978, Dr. Schultz and his colleagues released a study that recommended puppies and kittens be revaccinated every 3 years instead of every year. But this recommendation wasn't fully recognized until 2003, when a task force assembled by the American Animal Hospital Association gauged their findings. Although the American Animal Hospital Association noted that some vaccines protected pets for at least 7 years, they needed to strike a compromise with practicing veterinarians who were very fearful that they would lose clients if vaccine protocols were reduced. The American Animal Hospital Association's final recommendations were that owners should have their pets revaccinated every 3 years. Sadly, this 3-year recommendation is still not rooted in science, and even more frustrating, is still not followed by many veterinarians today.
How did that happen? Parents stripped away the blinders the medical and public health systems had put over their eyes and for once believed their hearts.
Around the same time that John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media, he also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was discovered that drugs could be produced from petroleum, America's top oil mogul ordered his army of propagandists to invert reality accordingly. Medicines used for thousands of years were suddenly classified as alternative, while the new, petroleum-based, highly addictive, and patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. After buying a German pharmaceutical company that manufactured chemicals of war for Adolf Hitler, Rockefeller leveraged his political influence by pressing Congress to declare natural healing modalities unscientific quackery. Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association and began offering massive grants to top medical schools under the mandate that only his approved curriculum be taught. Any mention of the healing powers of herbs, plants, and diet was erased from most medical textbooks. Doctors and professors who objected to Rockefeller's plan were crucified by the media, removed from the AMA, and stripped of their license to teach and practice medicine. Those who dared to speak out were arrested and jailed. When evidence began to emerge that petroleum-based medicines were causing cancer, Mr. Rockefeller founded the American Cancer Society, through which he suppressed that information. John D. Rockefeller is duly credited as the founder of the pharmaceutical industry, and the reason that medical error is currently the third leading cause of death in America. This is not an indictment against doctors. More than anyone, they are under the stranglehold of the single largest lobbying power in Washington. Every year, the pharmaceutical industry spends at least twice the amount as big oil to influence laws, policies, and public perception. Thanks to Mr. Rockefeller, the architect of American monopolies, no industry has more power over our lives than Big Pharma.
There was a time when I first started asking questions that all I wanted was
Where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH to say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, you know, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now, that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a
Isolate the bacteria or virus, give it to a normal person, and see what happens. We know what happens, which is basically nothing.
I'm not quite sure what's behind your question about isolation.